anyone like to come up for a story this morning?
So busy.
Good morning. It's good to see you. I want to tell you a true story this morning. This is
I love Terry Fox.
How many of you have heard of Terry Fox? How many of you have heard of Terry Fox?
We saw a video at my school
Did
of
you?
Terry Fox running around the country.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you that story this morning. And so instead of the usual cloth where we have a story from another place, I brought with me a map of Canada, because this is a story about our country here. And this story begins back in 1958. Oh, imagine. And it begins in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Does anyone know where Winnipeg, Manitoba is? Can you find it on this map? What was that?
Fran.
Yeah, it's kind of in the center of Canada. And back in 1958, this boy was born named Terry Fox in Winnipeg. And he had an older brother, and then a little bit later, he had another younger brother and a younger sister. So he had 3 siblings in his family, and his mom and dad, of course.
Yeah.
And he lived there until he was 12 years old. So he spent quite a few years there. And then his family moved to Vancouver. Where's Vancouver on this map? Can you find Vancouver?
I once went to Vancouver. It's right there.
A little bit lower. Just keep going down. There it is. Yeah. So when he was 12, he moved there with his family, and there he met his best friend, Doug, who was also 12, who lived in Vancouver, and they became best of friends, and they would be best of friends for the rest of Terry's life. And Terry used to say to his friend, "I like challenges. I never give up. I never give up on anything." And the one thing that he wanted more than anything else going into high school was to play basketball. And the problem was, he was terrible at it. He was terrible. He couldn't dribble a ball without losing it. He couldn't ever get a basket. He was just terrible, but he wouldn't give up. And so what happened, all summer, he and Doug played basketball in the yard, and then when school started, they went really early before school and they practiced, and after school they kept practicing, and by grade 10 they made the school basketball team, and in grade 12 when they graduated, both Terry and Doug were named Athlete of the Year.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? This was a guy that just didn't give up. Well, just a year after that, when he was 18, so this is Terry and Doug now grown up, and Terry started to have pain in his leg, really bad pain.
Yeah, he had cancer and he tried to run away from his cancer, but before he passed away, he was like all the way like almost around the country.
Yeah.
And then he passed away.
Yeah, we're going to get to that part. So what happens? He finds out he has cancer. Bryson is absolutely right. And he goes into the hospital, and the cancer was so bad in his leg that they had, in the hospital, they had to take his leg off. They took it off just at his hip. And he cried and cried and cried because he thought, what am I going to do now? But he wouldn't give up.
Yeah,
He wouldn't give up. And so what happened is that he got fitted, once that healed, he got fitted with what they call a prosthetic leg. And that allowed him to get around. And he was determined that he was going to run a marathon. And so he worked and worked, and it was so painful, and it would make the stub where his leg had been would bleed, but he wouldn't give up. He kept running, and he ended up running the marathon, and he came in last in the marathon. But he didn't give up. And he kept working at it, and he discovered a way to run that made it easier for him. And what he would do is, with the artificial leg, he would take a stride, and then he'd go stride, stride, and that's how he learned to walk and run, so that he could do it without putting more pressure on his artificial leg. And he noticed that there were a lot of people with cancer, and he wanted to do something about it. And so he said, I'm going to eradicate cancer from the world, which means I'm going to make sure there's no cancer anywhere in the world. And I'm going to do that by raising enough money to find a cure. And so, in 1980, in April, he and Doug went out to Newfoundland, St. John's, which is way on the east side of Canada, and they had a van, and Doug drove the van, and Terry started running and collecting money on the way for cancer. He would run 46 kilometers every day. Do you know how far that is?
Yeah, it's like an hour and 100 miles.
An hour and 100 miles. Yeah, if we were to start running here, we would run all the way to Peachland.
Wow.
So through Lake Country, through Kelowna, over the bridge, through West Kelowna, West Bank for those that want to call it that, and all the way to Peachland. That's how far he ran every single day. Rain, shine, it didn't matter. And as he started to cross the country, by the time he got to Quebec, people knew who he was and came out, and people would line the roads, and they were trying to collect lots of money, and people were cheering him on. And he went through Montreal and Ottawa and Toronto, and then headed through Ontario. And when he got to Thunder Bay, which is right here, so not quite halfway across, when he got there, he got really sick, and his leg started to hurt. And they decided he couldn't run any farther. He had to go back to the hospital in Vancouver, and he ended up, the cancer was now everywhere in his body. And at 23 years old, he died. He was only 23. But because he wouldn't give up, neither did everybody else. And so we have Terry Fox runs every year now to raise money for cancer in his name. And you know how much money's been raised so far since then?
My school there has been like $400.
$400, yeah. Well, that's helped add up to $750,000 $650 million.
Wow.
That's what's been raised so far.
We would have this goal to get to, and so the teachers would fill this red thermometer kind of thing up. And if it got to the top, the teachers would have to sleep on the roof.
So they had a challenge in Catherine's school, and if they reached the target, all the teachers had to sleep on the roof of the school for one night. Did they ever have to do that?
Oh, actually,
Every year?
every year.
That would be an incentive for me to put some money into it. Well, that's our story.
Never happened at mine.
That didn't happen at your school. We're going to sing a song which I think is a reflection of Terry, but I also want to say to you, Michelle's not here this morning. Margaret is going to be leading you in Children's Church. And what you need to know is that Michelle isn't here because her mother-in-law has cancer and she's not very well. And so we kind of hold Michelle and think of her today as we think about this story as well. So let's sing Like a Rock. And if you want to do the actions with me, that would be great.